The central narrative that I think it's a place that's based on exclusivity. And it has been that way. Condé Nast, the man, wrote about it in 1917 or something. He wrote a story in a trade journal about the power of sort of class. And it's not who you include as your readers, it's who you exclude. And that was always the model. And it worked really, really well. The company, they were category leaders in most of their magazines. And then they did whatever they could to sort of maintain that and to spend and to compete at a very high level. And it was this fantasy of white American middle class, upper middle class culture and of luxury. And it worked until the internet. And the internet was all about egalitarianism, not having taste be dictated from on high in the way that Condé Nast was so good at it, and not gatekeeping in the way that Condé Nast derived so much of its power.
So then when we have to be inclusive, we're in a reckoning with ourselves of what's our identity now.
Yeah. And the very sort of idea of a magazine is curating and presenting the things that you need that are worth knowing this month. And that's a process of curation, and that's omission.
Right.
And it's exclusion.
I'm Jill Demling, and this is Going Rogue. Today's guest is Mark Healy, editor, writer, and one of the sharpest observers of media power inside and out. Mark and I overlapped during what many call the golden era at Condé Nast. Different floors, different job titles, and very different points of view. And now that we've both stepped outside the glass towers, we can finally talk about it with reverence, realism, and a touch of rebellion. Because if you know, you know. At Condé Nast, there were rules, and then there were rules. Rule number 1, don't talk work in the elevator. They have ears, you know. And status? That was measured by whether your car was waiting downstairs or circling the block. Mark, equal parts participant and chronicler, knows that world from every angle, from climbing the editorial ladder to tearing it apart in the nasty. His Substack turned podcast that spares zero sacred cows. Mark's voice is funny, fearless, and exactly what this moment needs. So go ahead and get cozy in your cubicle, because today, Mark Healy goes rogue. Hi, Mark.
Hi, Jill. It's great to see you.
You too.
There's no video for this, is there?
No,
Oh,
I would not be the Vogue girl that you describe. I'm wearing like a tank top. It is hot as hell outside today.
I'm not going out. I'm going to stay here.
Went to the DMV for the second time for this real ID. And I hope the third time's a charm, because I left without a real ID for the second time.
Is it just you keep bringing documents?
Yeah, I guess so. Like, who has a social security card? I don't think, no one ever gave me one. I finally got my birth certificate from my mom because I didn't have that the first time. And then I thought I should self-laminate it because it's 51 years old. And then I looked it up and I was like, oh shit, you're not supposed to do that. So then I looked up how to get tape off a birth certificate and used a hairdryer. I mean,
disastrous. But at least you got to go to the DMV.
Yeah, and it's not so far, so it was really nice to see everyone again. Oh, it's just another excuse to stop by and say hi to the lovely people there.
Great. They're really warm and inviting.
Exactly. But I'm so glad we get to chat today. For everyone listening, all the millions of people, we both worked at Condé Nast during the Golden Age, or what people call the Golden Age. I don't think at the time we thought it was the Golden Age. We thought it was just the normal age, and maybe it was going to get better from here, not worse.
No, but when it started going down, we definitely noticed.
Oh, yes. Yeah, we were on the Titanic, and it was just cocktails. We were like, when's Prince performing? But we were doing very different things at very different magazines. And now that we've both moved on, I think we can talk about it with both reverence and realism. Okay, so to start, let's set the scene of the years we were there. So I started June 98 at 350 Madison. I was only there, I think, about a year. And I had to move Anna's whole office. I was her assistant then, to 4 Times Square. And then I had, I think, a couple years on the end of the 20 years, because I felt I still hadn't gotten everything I needed to get out of there for my resume. So I left at One World Trade Center. And you were at Details 93 to 97, then GQ 2001, 2011. So we obviously overlapped your second coming, right?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah,
I actually worked
yeah.
at Details twice, but we'll get into that.
Okay. So can you walk us through how you landed there? I have two writers on, but they were very specific in my world. So tell us a little bit about you and how you landed there.
Well, my first technically Condé Nast job was at Details in 93. And I had been an editorial assistant at Playboy. I worked for the fiction editor and the film critic and the New York office, and it was fantastic.
But let me just ask you something. What did your parents say when you said, "Hey guys, I got a job at Playboy"?
I think they were just happy I had a job. And
Okay.
I had been a kid who read a lot of magazines and devoured them, and they knew how much I wanted to get into the business. And so they were just happy that I was doing something promising or at least fulfilling. And so I worked there, and when you're an editorial assistant, you're constantly freelancing for other people. You're hustling, or I was anyway, just to make your $22,000 a year last. So you have to, you have to sort of make ends meet. And so I started writing for Detailing, like tiny book reviews, and then I wrote a couple of personal essays. And then a job came up as an assistant editor, and Details was hot, and everyone wanted to work there, and it was definitely kind of the youthful men's magazine that I didn't know I needed. And so I finagled my way into a job there. And we were so separate from 350 Madison. We very rarely went there. Sometimes we'd go use petty cash up there.
Wait, but where were you?
We were at 632 Broadway. So we were above the wholesale liquidators. It was between Bleecker and Houston on Broadway. I think we had 2 floors, but mostly we had the top floor, the 12th floor, and we also had a roof deck.
Oh my God. And is that because you guys came later? Was that with Fairchild or something? Or
no, we were still at Condé Nast magazine at that point. I don't know why they decided.
Maybe no room in 350?
I think that was probably part of it.
Oh,
yeah. And probably no room at 360 because they had 360 at the time. But it was the most fantastic place. I never
so much better.
Or anything. And we very much felt entirely disconnected from Condé Nast in that we always felt, we were in trouble for something all the time. We very much felt like kind of a stepchild, and we loved it. And we had David LaChapelle building $100,000 sets for shoots that we would kill. We were, constantly getting into trouble for just great cover lines.
Or Vin Diesel and the pink shirt or whatever. That might have been later.
Yeah,
right?
no, but same era, definitely the same era. It's like, that's who we were. It was a great place to be.
Yeah.
And so I worked there, and I eventually became an associate editor, and I eventually left there after, there was a lot of turmoil there. We were constantly changing direction as to what we wanted to be and who we were. And there was a lot of heat from the lad magazines that were, ascending at the time. We didn't know then that it would be as brief a moment for the lad magazines. But for men's magazines for 10 years, they were doing everything they could to compete with or react to lad magazines. And I worked in men's magazines mostly during that time. And so it was constantly a problem. And so we're always second guessing ourselves and second guessing our identity. And I think the company really wanted a larger magazine to make sense. We had our circulation and our ad revenue was just never enough to sort of fit that Condé model that they needed. And anyway, so it was an unhappy time, but we had a great time down there.
Yeah.
People who worked there.
Details was cool. Was it just too early then? Maybe it would have done better now. Maybe people have more of a sense of humor now, or maybe it would have gotten trolled much more, but I don't know. It has a Graydon Carter-esque feel to it, at least what you guys tried. Maybe it wasn't highbrow enough with the humor. I don't know. It was definitely more interesting than GQ, for sure, I thought.
It was definitely less establishment than GQ.
Yeah.
It definitely had a more evolved sort of masculinity and sense of masculinity, and more fluid one.
Right.
The fashion was edgier. The writing was definitely younger, and we
Right.
were reporting on what was then a really interesting youth culture in a
Yep.
way that other people weren't. We were inventive, and we had that energy that was great. I think that had they let us do our thing and maybe not tried to turn us into an 800,000 monthly subscriber kind of, had the circulation barrier or expectation for us, we could have been fine if
Right.
we just sort of made a similar magazine for a lot less money.
Yeah. Kept it more W, like let it be a
Yeah.
W. Yeah.
Yeah. So eventually it did go to Fairchild. So I left Details. I went to Rolling Stone for 2 years, which was also fantastic and completely different.
Right.
And then I jumped ship. They had closed Details. They had moved it uptown to 4 Times Square, hired yet another editor, shut it down, moved it over to Fairchild, and then they were going to start it again as a Fairchild magazine over on 34th Street. And I kind of knew Dan Paris a little bit, and I went over there because I wanted kind of the experience of a startup, because you never get that opportunity. So I went over there and definitely had a full dose of a startup, and it was rough, but we launched, and that was great in its way. And there were some great people there, and there were some great covers and work, and everything was great. And then I left, had a chance to go to GQ in early 2001 and took that immediately.
Right.
Because at the time, and especially to me, GQ is just at the top of its game. And,
Well, that was Art Cooper's time, right?
Yeah, it was
Yeah, he's a legend. He's a legend.
And it felt like you were working for a legend.
Yes.
And with
Yes.
all the good and bad that comes with it.
Right. I always reference this cover of The Observer, this cartoon of Cy holding the 3 kids, Art, Graydon, and Anna. And Art's just sitting there, and Graydon's pulling Anna's hair, and their dad, Cy, can't see it. It's a brilliant cartoon.
Wow, I remember those cartoons well, but I don't remember them. That's brilliant.
Yeah.
Because Graydon and Anna did have a slightly tormented relationship, I guess.
Okay, so you kind of took us through your timeline with the 2 different magazines. Oh, can you go a little bit deeper or tell us some of the key differences between the 2?
Yeah, so at Details, we were the anti-GQ, the anti-Esquire. We were challenging those, sort of idea and the magazine making itself, but also their very much established masculine, sort of purview, which was, and more GQ. GQ was even more mainstream than Esquire at the time, but it was like athletes and movie stars and, expensive watches and aspirational dressing and big name journalists. And we were very much the upstarts and reacting to that. And so when I eventually went there after a couple of years, you do feel like you're joining the Yankees. And I was never, I hated it.
So do I. I'm from Boston. Of course I do.
But I hate, I one time said to my kids are kind of like, I said, oh, I hate that. I forget what it was. And they were like, you hate everything because you hate winners. Basically,
I love them.
If anybody wins too many times in a row, you hate them.
Well,
exactly.
That's so funny.
So, I mean, that's a me problem.
Yeah.
But I have this natural sort of inclination to side with the number 2 and number 3 for whatever reason, the upstarts and the underdogs. And so, joining there really felt joining the biggest, most successful, established. Again, with Esquire, there's sort of a toss up in a lot of these things, but it definitely felt like I was joining this pretty elite group of editors and writers, and it was intimidating.
Yeah.
And I was incredibly grateful to the editors that brought me in. And I still am. And it's rough going with ARC. I remember when I started, Jim Nelson and Michael Haney had both brought me in, mostly Michael. And Michael and I had worked together at Details. And I'm always grateful to Michael for this. But when I talked to Jim in my interview, Jim and Michael together, they said, oh, remember that 6 months Art didn't talk to me? Everyone had a story where they were just sort of like, Art stopped talking to them at a certain point and froze them out. And inevitably, they brought them all back.
Froze them out in a meeting?
They didn't acknowledge them necessarily.
Oh, I can't even picture that from Grandpa Santa.
Yeah, he was tough. He could be tough that way. And I don't know how conscious it was. Art wasn't entertaining or greenlighting your ideas, and you were not getting the audiences that you once were.
I always heard about some sort of thing at GQ where there was like two editors there. I know Jim Nelson was one, that there was like two sides, like two teams under two editors, Jim Nelson being one, that alliances.
Well, when art was being pushed out and sort of orchestrating his exit and also setting up his predecessor.
Did he retire or pushed out?
Well, he was pushed out. He was creating, an opportunity for one of his staffers.
Okay. Okay.
And I don't know if we want to get into it, but the general perception was that Ron Galati, when he had returned to Condé Nast, hat in hand, after the talk, it wasn't a debacle, but it was a failure. Talk fizzled out. He came back to Condé Nast, and Cy or Steve Florio or someone, I don't know who was making these decisions. Again, this is the impression I've gotten, and this is how it felt when I worked there, that they said, well, you go to GQ and take over GQ for a little while. And he was like kind of bummed about that, but he had no choice because, again, he was coming back out of the wilderness. And so they gave him GQ. And one of his playbooks, as I understand it, and a lot of publishers' playbooks, was to agitate to remove the editor-in-chief, because they'd bring in a new editor-in-chief and they'd have all that publicity and attendant enthusiasm around a new name, and they could coast on that for a while, and maybe it would work. And in this case, the vibe was very much that Ron was advocating for art to retire or gently be pushed out. Now, I don't think he was wrong. I think that Art would even agree that it was time for him to go, and he just had to sort of orchestrate and just sort of manage his exit in the way that he wanted. So the two people were the two people that I just mentioned before, Jim Nelson and Michael Haney. It wasn't two sides of the magazine, but when there was a bake-off, they were both tapped to apply for the job and to go for it, and they both did.
It was something going around the whole building about this.
It's a little divisive when you have two editors up, and then they solicit their trusted colleagues for ideas, and so you do have this sense that there are these two sort of not really competing teams. There kind of was, and I remember giving ideas to both.
How it goes in the building. But let's talk about the Condé status symbols. This is taking a cue from The Nasty, your podcast. Cafeterias, newsstands, expenses, town cars. These are real Condé status symbols. Again, I haven't worked anywhere else, really. I did a year at 23 years old at a creative artists agency in LA, but I spent more time with Anna than my mom. I called her mom once, not to her face, but in a meeting, and everyone laughed. I'm like, I did not say that. I said, Anna. They're like, no, you said mom. I mean, 20 years from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. It was just the way it is. I didn't know the bad parts were unusual, and I didn't know the good parts were unusual, right? Listening to the podcast episodes that I've heard of yours, it's just hilarious. It's all hilarious. The elevator's hilarious. I didn't even clock that was weird, that you weren't supposed to talk in the elevator. It was just, again, normal. Like CAA, I maybe rode the elevator once. It was 2 floors in the building I worked at. One time I had to get Sean Connery downstairs, and we had a whole fight about who was getting in the elevator first until he got really annoyed. And he's like, after you. And I was like, okay, sorry, Mr. Connery. But other than that, I just remember Mr. Newhouse elbowing people when he was at the salad bar.
He didn't elbow me out of the salad bar. It was the first time there was Taco Tuesday, and I was online for tacos, and I must have been having an early lunch for some reason that day, because he ate at sort of 12:01.
Yes.
Anyway, he sort of looked up at me with his tray in his hand, almost like not quite asking permission, and then just sort of stepped in front of me.
Yeah. Can you give us just a general overview of the podcast? The status symbols of Condé Nast.
Status is obviously, there's a real thread of status and signifiers throughout anybody's experience at Condé Nast. And at the same time, everybody's experience was very different. And my experience was very different from yours, was very different from someone who worked in the fashion closet at Brides to whatever, whoever you were. Very different experience. So I'd hate to speak for anybody else. But I think that in the podcast, I want an episode about lunch, which I think is very important. I'm going to probably do an episode or two on parties. There's just so many great quotes about parties. You can do a whole podcast about about Vanity Fair's. Awesome.
Yeah.
Really good. So I'm going to do that. I'm definitely going to do something about age, because I think one thing that people forget about Condé Nast and the way they hired their editors in chief back in the day, they were in their 30s in a lot of cases. And they were early 40s, sometimes late 20s, early 30s, very youthful, inexperienced, and they kind of gave them the keys to the car. They wanted energy, and they were able to tap and identify really promising and talented people.
And lifers. Yeah, exactly. They didn't want a lot of changeover. It's like Anna definitely thought about that when she hired like her assistants. She promoted me after a year and a half from her assistant to editor. I was like, this is crazy. Like 25 years old, entertainment editor, and going to Sundance in 3 days, like by myself. I'm like, where is it? But for sure, they were looking for people long term, right?
Yep. And it gave them a fair amount of responsibility. I mean, if you think about it, it's like even the smaller magazines at the time were at least 50 people. But typically staff would be, 70, 80, 90 people. And that's a big head count for a 30-year-old with no real management experience, no real sense of budget, no real sense of like, the rules or the things that we've learned about how to manage a team and a company and a work staff since then is incredible. And they didn't learn any of that.
No, it was like, you'll figure it out. That's what happened with me with the talent group. I tried to resign once when my daughter was 1, and Anna's like, well, what are you going to do? And I was like, I'll do casting. And she's like, oh, Jill, it's going to be very lonely out there. And I was like out in the real world. Yeah. I was like, well, I'm not getting paid enough. Listen, I started as her assistant. I never left. So you're not getting from her assistant to an editor. I'm getting probably $40,000 at that time.
Yeah,
probably.
Yeah, you wouldn't get any substantive raise.
Yeah, exactly.
And then even when they made these people editors and chiefs, they typically doubled their salary. So in a lot of cases, that wasn't that much. You're a senior editor. In some cases, you're an executive editor, and then you're the editor-in-chief. And no one's in a position then to negotiate more.
And you're not getting your townhouse like the others did, right?
But they did, but in the end, they hung in. They did well.
Yeah. But at that time, I was going to be managing this whole group of people, and never was I given a handbook. And then later, I'm being told, as a manager, you did this wrong, you did this wrong. I'm like, you never even told me I was managing. I was trying to be like, okay, we're getting all the bookers together and we're a team. We're centralizing. Not that I'm managing them. There was no course. There was no Condé handbook to rules and regulations,
Yeah, they gave very little thought to that kind of through and follow through. And they just sort of felt like if they anointed the right people and let them do their thing, it would somehow miraculously work out.
Yeah. And my thing was, okay, I'm doing exactly what I learned from Mom, Anna. Like, I learned from her, so I'm just emulating my leader.
Good point. It's your dysfunctional chosen family.
No, exactly. But with the culture, because that mixes in with the status symbols, like with the elevator and that inner competition. So instead of us considering Hearst our main competitor, I'm thinking Vanity Fair is my main competitor, not Harper's, Vanity Fair. So I'm patting myself on the back when I first get that job, and I get Nicole Kidman because the celebrities took over the model and around 2001, kicked right in 2002. I'm booking 12 covers 2003. Who am I booking? Celebrities. Who's used to getting them? Vanity Fair and Jane Sirkin. Annie Leibovitz actually had to bring us together to make up. I'm like, I'm the little one here, like, just nipping at her heels and then, running past her. But it was this whole thing.
You bring up two really important points I think people don't forget. And there definitely was competition on the elevator. And I don't want to, for a while we competed. When I was at GQ, there was Details, there was Men's Vogue.
Right.
There was Cargo. So they kept piling on more and more men's magazines.
That is a blast from the past.
And then they also competed for ads. And, you had word rates were going up when sort of they tried to launch portfolio. Writers were getting in a bidding war within Condé Nast, which is just preposterous.
No, it was pretty crazy. And I know Cy liked that. Mr. Newhouse. I can't believe I'm calling him Cy. He thought it all kept people on their toes, right? Mm-hmm. All of these inner competition, all of this.
He was directing a movie.
Yeah.
The stars of the movie were the editors, chiefs, and they would compete with one another and, vie for attention and success and business and covers and clothes and everything. And I think that's exactly how he liked it. People forget that there used to be models on the covers of these magazines. And like GQ, I forget, but it wasn't until the 80s, late 80s, and they were kind of early. But it wasn't until like 88 or 87, they put Joe Montana or someone like that on the cover. I interviewed Jim Moore about it, and he had been working there beforehand, but like you went from models and then people started putting athletes and then movie stars. And then by the time InStyle sort of began having its moment, its first moment anyway.
Yep.
There were movie stars and musicians and TV stars on every single cover. And and the culture has not looked back.
No, it has not. And, Anna gets a lot of credit for it. I find it really interesting when I'm talking to the stylists who were there with me at that time. Tani somehow inherited every non-model ever. She didn't think when she was coming over to be fashion director that she wasn't going to get a shoot a model ever.
They're models for a reason.
Right. And they do what they're told because it's their job. Now they have opinions, hair and makeup people that do red carpet.
It's a collaboration, Jill.
Exactly.
It was a creative collaboration.
Exactly. No, but it was really interesting. And I think I did an interview years ago about it. So I really started kind of digging it up. And I saw very quickly, just looking through, now we have the Vogue and Condé Nast archives. And you can see when I started as an assistant, there was like 2 celebrity covers a year. Then there was probably 2 celebrities, 6 Giselles. But yeah, it shifted pretty quickly. And I had 11 until I left. Most years, and I would have had 12, but there's always a month where I couldn't find someone, right? So it wasn't because, we need a model for diversity. It was, Jill, no one really. I'm like, March has no films. Why is March and September the worst month for celebrities on the cover? But no, it's so true. It was the perfect storm with Vanity Fair not expecting anyone else in the building to really be competing with them. And that really changed. So did you buy into the mythology when you were there, the Condé codes of how to dress, how to email, where to eat lunch, or did you challenge them?
I didn't really. I didn't. I mean, I dressed better because I worked at GQ at a time where we cared and we dressed up, and it was almost like a costume, we're play acting. The idea of what we thought a men's magazine editor would look like.
Right.
I mean, in retrospect, that's kind of what we were doing. But I definitely had a problem with I didn't take very many cars. At all, ever. If I was traveling, I might take a car and I would get a ride with somebody, but I very, very rarely used a car. Working late, I would, if I was there till 11.
Yeah, but why not?
I don't know. It just wasn't who I was. I don't know.
I mean, I don't remember ever being told what my expense account was. There was never you're spending too much or that there was a number I had to keep under. I don't know if that was specific to me because of my role going out with these people, going to premieres, all this. So I was probably going out more.
Yeah. And the idea, we were also told that use it or lose it.
Right.
So if you created a certain expectation that you were going to spend X amount a month, then just keep doing that.
Exactly. And because I really did believe if there was an option, can I have this $30,000 as money? Then I would have taken that. But it's use it or lose it. So for me, exactly what you said, it was part of our salary.
Yes.
And we weren't going to be able to trade it in for coin. You know what I mean? But they added it on and they expected it. So I felt like our salaries were less because they were giving us kind of that endless amount of access or
you
something.
had a good excuse to use them because you had a more public kind of, role and went to more events and things than I did. And also the other thing, frankly, getting around in the subway is still the best way to get around New York. The subway
No, it's
is still
true.
the best way. And so that was part of it.
Yeah.
But you get used to living a certain way and you get a little bit spoiled. And, when I didn't do a ton of traveling, but when I traveled, I stayed at great places. And
Oh, yeah. We always had L'Hermitage, those years that we had to deal with L'Hermitage.
Let us stay there.
I mean, all the time. And yet there was an issue with Chateau. Yeah, the best years were the L'Hermitage, but Sunset Marquis, I could drive in and out. They had a great underground, but
now, I mean, I'd prefer to stay at the Sunset Marquis, but the L'Hermitage was a special place.
Oh yeah, totally.
And we all went on these great retreats that I think were sort of misidentified in the Michael Grimbaum book as being in Tulum one year, but it wasn't. It was like
we never had those.
Like an hour north of it. No, I remember when Jim Nelson took over. Believe someone had sort of said, you have a certain budget line where you can do X with. And I think that he seized upon that opportunity. And JetBlue was pretty new then, I think. And you could fly to JetBlue. The first one we went to, I think, was New Orleans. And you could fly to JetBlue really cheaply. And so we flew to New Orleans and we had a fantastic 3 days there. And we brought writers down, contributors, and we had meetings, and it was actually quite productive. It was also drunken and totally
right.
But it was also, we got up and we also worked for 3 days. And a lot of great ideas and franchises came from those meetings. And so Jim was like, we're going to keep doing them. And we kept doing them.
My sister always says, because, we grew up when my dad had a great job as a burn and trauma surgeon. I mean, hard job, but at Brigham and Women's in Massachusetts and Boston, and our college was pretty much paid for. And my sister always says, and that, and then he had some issues and it kind of went down from there. And she's always like, it's not fair. I would have rather grown up poor, because growing up with money and then becoming poor is it's just so harsh on the kids. And I'm like, okay, we weren't poor.
Yeah.
And are you fucking crazy? That's ridiculous. But, how we had it, I would messenger clothes to the consignment store from Condé Nast. Then we were suddenly not allowed to FedEx anything that wasn't business. That's what hurt me the most, was that FedEx and messenger stuff. But I can see how seeing the decline when what you're used to is one thing, even though the decline is still either better or the same as everywhere else where people were.
Totally.
But I know you have a timeline. So let's go back to your work. What were the pieces you were proudest of that you did at either GQ or Details?
There's so many pieces, I think, that, that I did and didn't do that I'm either extremely proud of or frustrated that they didn't work out in the way they did. But I think the kind of takeaways I did the Men of the Year issue for many years, which when I got there under art, I was given it because no one else wanted it. And
Really?
yeah, it was like, no, give it to the new guy kind of. And because it was just sort of a tired franchise, and it was just a portfolio, and it was a page
Mm.
profile, 200 words, and it was very predictable. And you just needed a remix so badly. And so when Jim Nelson started a couple years, I got to hold on to it. And then he sort of kicked off the conversation probably at one of those retreats that we went on. He was like, should we kill Modi, Man of the Year?
Yeah, yeah.
Should we get rid of Modi? Should we even do it? And there was some debate about whether we should do it or not. And then we ended up doing it, and we ended up putting a lot of creative energy into it. And we just remade it, and felt new, and we had a different kind of party. He invested in a much better party in LA.
It's
Very
huge now.
close. When I started I think they'd sold it to NBC. So it was on like NBC at 7:30 on a Saturday night and also in early December. So it's just like when everybody has a Christmas party to go to or a dinner or something, somewhere to be, it would be on television.
I didn't even know it was televised. That's wild.
Yeah. And so bad. And I don't think anybody watched it. It was kind of an event that way. And then we got rid of all of that. Jim made this very intimate party at the chateau that was sort of, people felt really comfortable, and where the honorees could sort of let down their hair and hang out with everybody else. And it was great.
And you get everybody, Obama, you have athletes, you have Clooney. I mean, I remember so many of them, but they're sharing covers when they would never do that for any other situation, but for Modi. So that shows how significant it became.
And again, like split covers were still kind of new then too. So, I mean, maybe less so, but like there was a point which everyone sort of started realizing we can make an event out of a cover if we split the cover, and then, we can split it into 3, and it's not that much more expensive, and you just have to do certain things to make it work. And then there were, 10 covers. But
we all still know you won't split a really, really good cover. You split when we can't do her alone, but we can split her.
Exactly. And we can split, or a split makes sense or something, and we would mix it differently, so you'd get like 80% of the Brad Pitt one.
Oh, yeah. You're saying split, but you're not saying 50-50. So you're not saying anything, but it doesn't have to be 50-50.
Yeah. Could be 98 too.
Exactly. The way you say it.
Well, and then also, so those were big, and like putting James Gandolfini on one year.
Yes.
And we just got a great shoot, and it was great. And then, like I did a Jennifer Aniston cover that was, that I wrote, that was kind of memorable at the time. We were following Vanity Fair, but we had a real kind of interesting interview, and that was pretty fun. I remember.
Yeah, and she's not easy to get either. Okay, so let's talk about leaving Condé, post Condé. Let's put it that way, because for me, when I left, it was before COVID. So working from home was totally foreign. Like no one in the entire world had ever done it. That's how it felt like. No one did it. And I had always been going to an office. And I felt like it was one thing knowing I was leaving. I stayed on from October 4th through the year, trained my replacement, and then figuring out when the announcement of me working with Edward was going to come out. But it all hits you when your email's cut off, when you're no longer Jill from Vogue or Mark from GQ, or luckily you'd worked at a couple other places and some that were outside of Condé. So you came into Condé already with yourself, right? I was pretty much born there. So my identity after Condé was something I kind of had to find. Although I had gotten great advice from Stephen Huvane, a big publicist, Jennifer Aniston's publicist, when I started, because I'd worked for his brother at CAA, Kevin Huvane. So I was very close friends with Chris, their youngest brother.
Chris is the one who got us the Gandolfini cover. I worked with.
Oh, of course. Yeah. He was like my first friend when I moved to New York, but Stephen said to me, just make sure how you act, that when you're not Jill or Jill Demling from Vogue, that people still take your calls. So from day one, I kept that in the back of my mind, almost making sure that would never happen, because I can totally see that happening to a lot of people, because it wasn't my power. It wasn't my power. And I was always very aware of that. But what was the transition out of GQ, and how did you find it being on the other side? Because that was a full 10 years. I mean, that's a decade before you left the second.
First of all, you're right about people mistaking the power of the title with their own power.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's very hard for a lot of people who don't recognize that. No, it's the editor-in-chief of whatever magazine they want. And all that sort of bestows, it's not you.
Right.
Necessarily. And it's that kind of classic thing of like just believing that like a celebrity is your friend.
Right.
No, you've interviewed them.
Right.
They were kind to you, and you maybe connected on a couple of things, and maybe you had a great shoot, but you're not friends.
Right.
And
exactly.
you have to sort of keep that in check. To be honest, so after Lehman Brothers collapsed and after shuttered all those magazines in 2008, and for the year or so after that, it felt like we had too many editors, too many stories to produce, too many photos to run, and not enough pages. And because all the pages were down, page counts were dependent on advertising, which wasn't there. And it just felt like it was easy to sort of lose your purpose there, because I needed them much more than they needed me. And so I had an opportunity to go to Wenner Media when my friend from Rolling Stone, a guy named Jason Fine, took over Men's Journal. And so he was going to take over Men's Journal. He needed a number 2. I knew that if I went there, it would be far less glamorous. It would be harder to book covers, harder to get writers, just harder, scrappier. But I also knew that I'd be working my ass off, and if he needed a way, I needed to be needed then.
Right.
And so I went there, and so it didn't feel. I was kind of happy to leave Condé Nast because
that was the beginning, the downhill. Started
that was
2008,
and I wasn't so much worried about the decline, but it didn't feel good to sort of sit around being paid and not being able to contribute in the way that you kind of should have at that point in my career,
well, you're in the art world. I mean, everyone's writers. And I mean, it's all art brains and creative brains. So that's where work and pleasure and hobby all come together. It's not like we're doing a job where you're punching in and out. There's a love behind it too, a passion behind it too. So when you're not working, you're not creating, you're not feeding that part of you that made you want to do this in the first place. That's the complicated thing about everyone at a magazine, is the love of what you do that is work. And it's who you are. It defines who you are as well, you know?
You're right. It's a little different than just purpose. It's also being able to sort of express and see your creativity expressed.
Exactly.
Collaborate with other people to make something cool. And there was just fewer and fewer opportunities to do that.
Yeah.
And it just felt like a good time to leave. It wasn't traumatic at all. It wasn't.
Well, you went right into something, I guess. Yeah. I went to freelance. So freelance for a personality like me, a little crazy.
What'd she say? It's lonely out there.
Lonely out there. Okay, let's jump ahead to now with the podcast, The Nasty. So tell us about the podcast.
I'll make this as quick as possible. So the podcast started because I did another podcast. During the pandemic, I reached out to a writer who had pitched me an idea once. We never got to do it. And I said, this should be a podcast. We ended up making a podcast called City of the Rails, which is about freight trains and hobos and this sort of train hopper culture. And it was really good. We had a great time making it. I kind of got the bug. And then I was looking around. I was like, what else can I do a podcast about? And my wife worked at Allure from the beginning of Allure to 1993. She was working there when I met her. She later worked in corporate editorial, and she understands the world certainly as well as I do. So we were all constantly talking. the decline of the company and kind of the personalities and how they were doing. Like, how were they adjusting to life as mortals? And so I got this idea in my head. What did they do with all the clothes? Like, when do they get to wear those clothes? That was one of the things.
Right.
So it was like something we constantly talked about. And so I was like, fuck it, I'm just going to start interviewing people. I'm going to do like an oral history of working at Condé Nast at its peak. And then I started interviewing people. Everybody sounded great. I wrote proposals. I had a lot of interest. And then right when I was ready to do this 10-episode series, which would be a longer 45-minute, 50-minute episodes, the economy for podcasts just completely was underwater and just like completely collapsed. And so I couldn't sell it. And then I was contractually obligated to the people I was working with, the studio in LA. And so I couldn't work on it for a couple of years. So I was kicking around. I was like, all right, I interviewed 50 people. I owe it to them, at the very least, to do something with these interviews, because they were good interviews and they're smart, articulate people. They have a great sense of humor. They really understood what they had gone through, what had changed. And I had all this great tape and I wanted to do something with it. Finally, when I saw you, it was you who decided me to do this. When I saw Going Rogue, I said, I got to do something with what I have. So I just taught myself the script, which I should have done 2 years ago, about an hour.
It's so not that hard.
It's not that hard. It was harder when I first tried to learn it.
Okay.
So I learned how to do the script, and then I just started compiling these mini episodes.
Yeah.
Just like on a lark. And now I've got the 4th one that just came out. It sort of follows the hiring of 5 editors-in-chief. So that's all it is. It's Ruth Reichel, it's Linda Wells, it's Art Cooper, it's Graydon Carter, it's Jim Nelson, and Adam Rappaport. I counted wrong. It's 6. And
That's
it's just
awesome.
kind of like the process of them getting hired, and they're wildly different. And if I can figure out a way to pay for them, I'll keep cranking them out. But you know how you have to pay somebody to sort of produce some of this. But that's how it all came about.
And listen, the script's not hard, but it takes fucking forever. It takes me, because I'm OCD and type A, 4 times as long as the interview to edit it. Because, of course, I want to take out all of the likes, ums, and buts.
Yeah.
Like, I want to sound like I'm Obama giving a speech, you know?
Dude, I thought it was Obama when you first came out.
So, speaking of Going Rogue, I'll tell you that I was trying to get Going Rogue, the IG page, verified. And my guy at Instagram was like, you need like 2 to 3 pieces of press. So I just Googled, it's like Googling myself. I Googled Going Rogue, and the Substack where you mentioned it came up. Oh. So that's how I read what you wrote. And I tried to submit that as press. And they were like, first of all, it's not even a good review. Like, no.
Well, you got the thing in Puck.
Yeah. But I still haven't. I think something's coming out this week. But
is that how you get verified? I'm so unsophisticated about this.
Yeah. Okay, so in your Substack, you said my conversations, don't attempt to expand a collective central narrative the way you felt they could or should if done differently. I actually appreciated that observation because it's true. My podcast is never meant to be investigative or all-encompassing. It's intimate and story-driven, more than expose. But I'm curious from your perspective, what would a true collective narrative look like? What stories are still missing from the public record? And whose voices haven't we heard from enough?
First of all, I want to defend myself. I didn't mean that to be slight. It's just a different thing. You can get into a groove for a long time with someone, and it's a single voice, and that's what the best podcasts often are. But I wanted to do something where voices would play off of one another in an oral history style. So I meant no offense on that.
No, I was only pissed and cursing your name for like 10 hours, and then I was over it.
But the central narrative that I think is kind of missing is it's a place that's based on exclusivity. And it has been that way. Condé Nast, the man, wrote about it in 1917 or something. He wrote a story in a trade journal about the power of sort of class. And it's not who you include as your readers, it's who you exclude. And that was always the model, and it worked really, really well. The company, they were category leaders in most of their magazines, and then they did whatever they could to sort of maintain that and to spend and to compete at a very high level. I think that worked very well for them. And it was this sort of like fantasy of white American middle class, upper middle class culture and of luxury. And, it worked until the internet. And the internet was all about egalitarianism and not having taste be dictated from on high in the way that Condé Nast was so good at it, and not gatekeeping in the way that Condé Nast derived so much of its power. I talked to one editor, and she said, one came up in a meeting, and this woman worked at Lucky, and she said, someone was like, do we want to do a story about Michelle Obama wearing, this dress? She's like, why would anyone care what Michelle Obama was wearing? And it's like totally, I didn't understand it at all. And that's the missed opportunity. Not saying they missed that opportunity necessarily, or that person did.
Right.
That was the time where a lot of magazine editors looked at the internet as an annoying fad.
Oh, that's why we were so late. The digital frontier came very, very late. But what you just said was interesting, and it reminds me of what Adam Green said when he was on about being called a theater critic, because I had a lot of questions about that, because his pieces never critiqued theater productions. He said the way Vogue critiques is by exclusion. If you're not being talked about, that's us saying, not that you're bad, but you're not great, or else we would have talked about you. But then how does that work with this whole fight for inclusion? So it's almost like our one thing that, I don't know, that was celebrated, even other people celebrated it. The people that wanted to be in put the importance on being in as much as we put the importance on allowing you in, right? Everyone was playing the game. So then when we have to be inclusive, is it a free-for-all? And then what makes anything Vogue? If we have to include this person, this person, this person, we're in a reckoning with ourselves of, what's our identity now?
Yeah. And the very sort of idea of a magazine is curating and presenting the things that you need that are worth knowing this month. These are the things that we're telling you are worth your time and get our endorsement one way, at least.
Right.
And that's a process of curation, and that's omission.
Right.
And it's exclusion.
Yeah. No, it's true. It's true. Okay, so looking back at your Condé years, what rises to the top? The people, the prestige, the purpose?
Definitely the people. Especially at GQ, I worked with the most talented, dedicated, kind,
You're all in it together. It's like, were you in the shit? Yeah, I was in the shit. The famous Bill Murray line. That's kind of what it felt like a lot of times.
Yeah, it's true. And, when Jim Nelson came, there were already a lot of great people there, but when Jim Nelson came, he just made the most of his opportunity and hired all of these great people. And he also really pushed and inspired a lot of other people to do great work who had been there. And it was just sort of great to see that sort of blossoming of a magazine, but absolutely the people.
Yeah. Do you miss the pace, the polish, the problems?
I miss the talking to writers, developing stories, taking your time, research, having conversations about stuff, about stories, and having it be an evolution. That doesn't happen very often anymore.
Right.
So I definitely miss that. And that's the pace. It was a monthly, and we would assign stories that wouldn't see the light of day for 9 months sometimes.
Right.
Longer if they needed it. And
there was no break, though. Yeah, that's the one thing when I use the analogy of punching in, punching out. You're never punching out. It's like, yay, we closed September. Okay, next September. Anna would call me in, and I always had an answer. I was always very prepared, and people thought I was her pet. I'm like, I'm not her pet. I'm just a really good employee. But she'd be like, so Jill. It was usually when she was bored, because usually you don't sit down, but she's like, so November. And I'm like, so and so. She's like, December. We'd go all the way through the next year, March. Well, this movie will be da da da. The following September, I'm like, oh, those films haven't even gone into production yet. Well, get back to me when they have. I'm just like, but that's it. Always. There was never, not even a day. The Met Gala, we talk about next year's Met Gala the next day on that Tuesday.
Of course. Yeah.
So it's insane.
It was good.
And do you feel like that era still influences how you approach work today? I mean, it's the topic that you're working on, so you're in it. You're not working there, but you may as well be. I have PTSD. To be living that much in there would be very triggering to me.
I think one of the things is you look back and you realize how much waste and inefficiency that was baked into the system, and you can do so much more with so much less than we did.
But we're still talking fashion. Well, fashion magazine. So I'm just starting there. We're not like BBC. So we could start peeling that onion and starting to feel real shitty about ourselves that we aren't doing.
Yeah, I guess I just mean that there were just built-in inefficiencies that we took for granted and indulged in some level.
Right.
Sometimes you need that in order to create something incredible, but mostly you didn't need as much as there was.
No, it's true. It's true. So what do you think our generation of Condé editors will be remembered for? Overspending, underperforming? No.
Honestly, I think they're going to be remembered for, FedExing rugs home from Turkey and expensing their kids' birthday parties. Unfortunately, their people will be remembered for the waste and the zero interest mortgage loans. I think that's mostly what Condé Nast will be remembered for, that era.
And then what advice would you give to a young writer today who still wants to write for a magazine, a print magazine, to not do it?
Yeah, then they're Delulu. There's the print magazines that I've seen that are successful are primarily images and, photos and illustrations and things like that. There's not a lot of writing, although obviously the New Yorker, Atlantic, things like that are different, but why print? My advice would, there is no, just print is too limited.
Okay. So you're on Substack. I didn't really understand that. And I was reading something, I think it was an ID of Graydon Carter talking about it. Would you recommend something like that for a writer to get his work seen?
I would recommend writers do two things that I wish I had done more of, which is do the reporting and acquire a knowledge of some domain. So domain knowledge of some
get your beat.
Get your beat and really make the most of it, and then branch out from there. But get really good at covering something. And
that's a lot of people have been saying, whether it's photographers, Jimmy Paul hairdresser, learn that one thing, be a great braider, be a great barber. I'm doing a lot of different things. If I need someone specialized, I know who to tap. Yeah. Okay, so at the end of each episode, I do 7 rapid fire questions. Usually I do all the same, but my friend Claude came up with 7 for you that are not the ones I usually ask. Okay, so these are tailored for Mark Healy. Okay, print or digital?
That's not there's no rapid fire answer for that. I mean, digital.
Black car or Uber?
Neither.
Google Docs or Red Pen?
Google Docs.
Twitter or Threads?
Neither.
Deadline or extension?
Extension.
Launch or legacy?
Launch. There's nothing like launching a magazine.
Badge in or badge out?
What does that mean?
Ask Claude.
A bat? Where,
Like a
like you,
key card, like in or out.
like coming to work, leaving work? I don't understand.
Okay, let me just ask you.
Claude, I'm sorry, I don't understand that.
I don't either. My regular one, AM or PM?
It used to be PM, now it's AM.
Okay, text or talk?
Talk.
Uber or Subway? But I already know Subway.
Subway.
Book or film?
Book.
Sweet or spicy?
Sweet.
Spots or stripes?
Stripes.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Top or bottom?
It's kind of a personal question.
It's just top or bottom. Everyone's a top. Everyone I've had on is a top.
Okay, top.
Well, this was fun.
Yeah, that was fun. Thank you for having me.
I mean, we could have kept talking forever.
We could have, and sadly, I have to run. But yeah, no, this was great. Thank you so much for having me on. It was,
of course,
you were so much kinder than I thought you were going to be.
Who me? I'm sweet and innocent. Wink, wink. All right.
Congratulations on Going Rogue. Fantastic.
Thank you. It's a lot of work, as you know. It gets me out of my comfort zone.
Exactly. Yeah. Great. Yeah. You're going to make me sound smart, I hope.
Yes, of course.
Bye.
See you soon. Bye. Okay, that's our show. Thanks for listening to Going Rogue. And be sure to like and subscribe. Today's show is produced by me and Maddie Rosenberg at Radio Free Rhinecliff with assistance from Maddie Kelly. Special thanks to David Vo for our great graphics and Taras Romanov for our epic theme music. See you next Friday.